A regional aviation sector strike almost ground flights across West and Central Africa. The Agency for Aerial Navigation Safety in Africa and Madagascar has suspended its strike for 10 days for negotiations. We'll look at the issues that led to the strike and the potential for a resolution of the 18-country members of the group. And Mozambique may be on the verge of being added to a gray list for countries that aid illegal financial transactions and tax fraud. The details of the situation later on the show. You're watching Business Edge right here on News Central. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Let's start with African business headlines. Nigeria's Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) has said that the passage of the proposed Investments and Securities Bill seeks to reduce the rise of Ponzi or pyramid schemes as well as other illegal investment schemes. The Director General of the Commission, Lamido Yuguda, expects the bill will boost growth in Nigeria's financial services industry and facilitate the effective functioning of the capital market to make it more competitive, as well as help in Nigeria's ongoing economic diversification. South Africa's struggling state-owned electricity provider, Eskom, will extend power interruptions on the national grid until Thursday. The country is in stage 3 load shedding, meaning 3,000 megawatts has been removed from the grid. This started from midnight on Sunday to about 4 p.m. Monday and will then continue daily until Thursday. Eskom says constraints from diesel suppliers are hurting the availability of bulk diesel to 2 gas turbines. In East Africa, Kenya has shipped its first consignment of locally made batteries to Ghana 2 months after it was picked among 7 countries to pilot the Continental Free Trade Area that seeks to unlock the movement of goods and services in Africa. The Kenyan-made batteries worth 9.24 million Kenyan shillings landed in Ghana, marking a formal start of preferential trading under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area framework. The consignment by the Associated Battery Manufacturing EA Limited is the clearest indication that Kenya can now access markets in West and Central Africa at preferential rates. Zimbabwe is planning to mine lithium, platinum, and nickel for the production of solar batteries at an industrial park. Speaking on the project, President Emerson Mnangagwa said it would help turn around the decline of Zimbabwe's economy. The country expects it will provide the land and minerals for the park, while 2 Chinese companies will invest at least $2.8 billion for machinery for the project. The president believes the country can have a $12 billion mining industry in Zimbabwe by next week. Ethiopia has capped the amount that foreign shareholders can invest in its banks at 30%. The cap is applicable for foreign lenders that want to acquire stakes in existing banks. An additional 5% stake will be allowed for foreign individuals and foreign non-bank investors each, taking the maximum stake a local bank can sell to foreigners to 40%. The much-awaited foreign investment law is expected to clear the way for Kenyan banks such as Equity, KCB, and Co-operative Bank to set up operations in Ethiopia. Cooperative Bank has said it would prefer to enter the Ethiopian market through a joint venture with Ethiopia's cooperative movement in a deal similar to its South Sudan business, in which the government has a stake. And those are a few headlines we have for you. Our first conversation comes up and it takes us right into the heart of the issues of a strike that took place over the weekend. Many would not have noticed, but West and Central African air traffic controllers embarked on a 2-day strike that was suspended after a few hours. What are the issues and what needs to be done so that after 10 days, there isn't a full-scale strike? The conversation after this. Air traffic controllers who are part of the Agency for Aerial Navigation Safety in Africa and Madagascar have suspended the strike that they embarked on Friday, which disrupted flights across the region and left hundreds of passengers stranded at airports on Saturday. But since the strike's suspension, resumption of activities has been slow as there were still flight cancellations reported in many locations on Saturday. The strike has been put on hold for 10 days to allow for negotiations. The Agency for Aerial Navigation Safety in Africa and Madagascar is an 18-member state agency that manages air traffic over an area covering 16 million square kilometers of airspace. Joining me from Lilongwe, Malawi is aviation consultant Sean Mendis. Sean, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So this is, I guess I would say, a group that many people don't know too much about, but they have a very important job that they do. And the strike that even lasted just a few hours on Friday really had the potential to disrupt many things. So let's look at that in terms of the strike. So it happened after negotiations had fallen through. So what are the issues that are bringing this association to this point?
You know, as you mentioned, SECNA is not an agency that many people, it's not a household name for sure, but it does serve a very important role in that it provides air traffic control services and some few other aeronautical services in most of former French colonies or Francophone Western Central Africa. So pretty much everywhere from Dakar down to Brazzaville is covered by a SECNA. And, you know, the controllers over there have had a number of issues related to their pay, related to their working conditions, and have been in discussions with authorities over this for a while. Unfortunately, they were not able to come to an agreement. And as a result, they struck work on Friday and into Saturday morning. And you know, that has had a significant disruption on flights, not just in the region which SECNA controls, but flights which have to fly over that region. So, for example, flights coming from the US into Ghana and Nigeria are affected because they have to fly over a SECNA-controlled airspace to reach Ghana or Nigeria, which, of course, have their own air traffic control systems.
So what's at the basis of the demands? What is SECNA asking for that seems to be the sticking point that they have not been able to reach agreement on?
Well, I think the sticking point, you know, is largely that the controllers want to be more represented. They feel that SECNA, you know, everyone made a lot of sacrifices during the COVID pandemic, and now that things are bouncing back, the controllers believe that they're not quite getting their share of the rebound, so to speak, and you know, that's what's leading to it. But you know, the issues are going to be very different in each of the 18 jurisdictions in which they operate. So while this has been a coordinated strike across all 18 of these, we saw even during the strike that not every single one of these jurisdictions had the same level of participation in the strike. In some places in Central Africa, for example, there was still service available because not everyone went on strike, while in places, especially in Dakar, FIR, the Flight Information Region, we found that the strike had a much larger impact.
All right. So you mentioned, of course, the countries affected, and then even in terms of indirect impact as well. So what do we know as of Monday morning right now? Have all of those who went on strike returned to duties? Do we know that everything is basically back to pre-Friday normal levels as of now?
Yeah, the union has said that they've instructed all their members to go back to work as of Saturday evening. So as of Sunday, the workers, the air traffic controllers, should be back in place. But of course, you know, that there's still a backlog of passengers from 1 and 2 days of cancellations who've been sitting at airports, sitting in hotels, who need to be back on their planes. So you know, the impact will probably take closer to 4 or 5 days to completely clean up, and hopefully, you know, there is a 10-day period now where the union said they're re-engaging with management in negotiations, and hopefully they will be able to reach a common ground in that 10 days to avoid a recurrence of this in the first week of October.
Okay, so you talk about the impact in terms of the passengers who are now having to find a way around the delays that came. But beyond that, we've heard from the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Association, and they represent more than 50,000 members in some 125 countries. And they said that while the strike was on, unqualified staff, including military personnel who had no civil air traffic control experience, took over working positions. This is a very, very delicate job. And as you mentioned earlier, not just affecting those in the region, but also affecting planes flying through the region, having to be in contact and trust the air traffic control towers for all of their movement. What are some of the consequences you anticipate from this? Because there's also the issue around not even informing passengers that the people who are supposed to tell your plane to take off and to land are not even trained in that job. What do you think are the consequences beyond rerouting and rescheduling flights for passengers?
Well, there definitely are safety, issues that are raised. And I think that the bigger issue is not as much that they put military controllers into these roles, but that they did it without actually notifying airlines. And that was the case in a number of cases where they said business is on as usual, but the business was on with military controllers in place rather than civilian ones. And it is perfectly safe to fly aircraft without air traffic control. Air traffic control is there to facilitate rather than anything else. But when you are there, expecting the controller knows what they're doing while the controller might not, that's where the safety margins begin to get eroded. So all airline pilots are trained how to operate in case there is a failure of air traffic control. In case your radio fails or whatever else, you have to have procedures to be able to let you land and take off safely. So all pilots are trained in that. They just need to be able to know that this condition is what is in place, that you do have inexperience, you do have unqualified, you do have military persons in the tower. So yes, that is definitely concerning. I think it shows that in a number of cases, this was governments trying to step in and minimize the damage to it. But it may have actually, we were lucky it did not, but it could have potentially led to a much larger problem if something had gone wrong.
So let me follow up with that, because that statement also talks about the fact that these are parties to the Convention on International Civil Aviation, and that IATA, this ICAO, as well as ALPA had also been notified. So when you look at that, we're getting into this aviation. When you look at that, you see that these are agencies and organizations that have to maintain a certain standard. There are ratings, there are rankings, there are so many things that are done just to ensure the flying public of the highest standard when it comes to this. So in terms of the long-term consequences, we haven't heard officially from the International Aviation Transport Association, but what do you think is going to happen? Do they have to get involved in this situation? Should they be part of the negotiations so it doesn't become a bigger issue beyond here?
I can almost certainly tell you that they will not get involved with it. Historically, we've seen that throughout the world, they have, they intend to keep standards the same. So at most, you might see a statement saying that don't do this again. But as far as the actual labor relations go, they're not going to, they're not going to get involved. I mean, if you look back at history, in Europe, air traffic control strikes are, I won't say regular, but they tend to come up 2 or 3 times a summer. Most recently, we've had strikes in France and Italy already this summer, which have led to many cancellations and disruptions. Historically, the largest ever air traffic controller strike was in the US in 1981. And that was only resolved when President Ronald Reagan fired 11,000 plus air traffic controllers and replaced them initially with military controllers. And then it took almost 10 years for the FAA to hire and train up, replacement controllers there. And, throughout that, there's just been statements, but it's not like anyone said, don't fly to the United States, it's unsafe. Aviation is resilient, and, aviation safety is not reliant on a single failure point like an air traffic controller. There's an entire ecosystem. Everyone is trained on what jobs they need to do. And, the pilots will step up, the airline operators will step up, and, they'll build in additional safety margins into their operations to ensure that safe operations continue.
So as you mentioned, of course, it's not absolutely rare to have this. We know that earlier this year, we've seen the situation in Morocco and Tunisia, which both experienced a degree of flight disruption as well. And this is not the first notice or the strike happening in Africa so far, and particularly with this organization as well. Is there a trend we need to be wary of, or a trend we need to look out for in the aviation industry? Or it's a disagreement about salaries, about wages and remunerations? It's just that?
I think the trend is definitely there today, more so than, say in 2019. And I think a big reason for that is COVID. Because of COVID, a lot of sacrifices were made across the board. Workers took salary freezes, they took half salaries for a while, they were sent on unpaid leave. And now that they're coming back to work and they're seeing, flight volumes are coming back to what they were before that, they basically want compensation for what they gave back, and are often not quite sympathetic to employers' positions that, but we also lost money, we need to recover that money before we can pay you back. So I think it's not just in aviation. I think you're seeing that in a number of sectors across Africa and across the world, that there is a bit of tension between labor and management, and air traffic controllers are no different in that respect.
Do you think they should be treated like essential services, like doctors and nurses who cannot, in many countries, actually go on strike without some sort of notice or even go on strike at all because of the sensitivity of the work that they do and the services they provide?
Definitely there's an argument for that. I think that as long as planes are flying, it's essential that, every possible safety margin is put in place to allow them to do so safely. And I think in a number of the countries that ASECNA operates, they have essentially been treated like that. I won't name specific countries, but in a number of countries, the traffic controllers were told, get back to work and don't go on strike or else there will be consequences. And, they did so, especially in Central Africa. So, yes, they are de facto become essential workers anyway, even though the legislation may not quite reflect that, in every jurisdiction.
All right, so now they're back to the negotiating table. 10 days. The association has said they will go back on strike if their demands are not met. Has either party or any of the parties involved given a bit of room that makes us believe that in the next 10 days we're going to see a resolution? Again, given the fact that this is 18 member countries, 17 African countries plus France that are involved in this association, and would we even be able to reach an agreement that would be reasonable for everyone to abide with?
I think that is one of the main issues. As I mentioned before, ASECNA has got such wide, variance. I mean, you've got controllers in Madagascar and the Comoros, and you've got controllers in Cote d'Ivoire and in Senegal. So obviously they've got very different interests there. And while ASECNA as a central body is the one who's negotiating with the union. So I think definitely there will be some give and take. I'm not privy to the negotiations as it comes to, but I think, ASECNA and of course the governments who empower ASECNA as a multinational agency have realized that, the controllers have the power to cause significantly more overall economic disruption than just the cost of their demands. So, there needs to be some give and take in that respect. And I expect that the controllers will get a significant chunk, but definitely not all of what they're asking for. And, a middle ground will be found between the two within the next 10 days. It's the consequence of it not happening is another set of flight groundings and paralysis across half of Africa, essentially. And that's not something that people want to see again.
And definitely it's not something we want to see again. So in 10 days, you do anticipate we'll see some kind of positive resolution to this, and we'll continue to see safe skies and safe flying over West and Central Africa and across the continent as well.
No, absolutely. Right. And I think that safety is the main concern for everyone over here. And African aviation safety has developed so much over the last 2 decades that I don't expect this to escalate into something that creates unsafe skies, regardless of what the eventual outcome is.
All right, Sean, thank you so much for that. We're going to continue to keep an eye out. It's a countdown. We've started now, 10 days to go to see what ASECNA comes back with, and of course, those who are involved in the negotiations. Thank you so much. All right. And as I said earlier, it is an association that many are not aware of, but if you have flown throughout West and Central Africa or have had any reason to fly through the airspace, this is an association that has impacted your travel in one way or the other. They're back to the negotiating table for the next 10 days to see if they can reach a compromise. The air traffic controllers of West and Central Africa are asking for more wages. They're asking for remunerations. I beg your pardon. They're also asking just for a bit more so that they feel that they are definitely being taken not for granted. We'll be following this 10 days to go to see how things play out. And of course, we'll see if the demands are met and if compromises can be found. You're watching Business Edge. We'll take a quick time out. So when we come back, it is up to international business on the list. Stay with us.